Welcome to Heartbreaker, your love radio. There are situations in our lives that are impossible to overcome. Some betrayals feel like death itself. Jake always believed in the importance of character. He had his flaws, but he took his honor seriously. In his early 20s, he was dating the woman he thought was the love of his life, Emma. Together with their inseparable friends, Andrew and Laura, they formed a harmonious quartet. They would go to bars, eat pizza, and enjoy each other's company. However, the beginning of Jake and Emma's relationship was not as smooth. Emma didn't always like hanging out with Andrew and Laura, and after a particularly noisy night at the bar, she expressed her feelings. "Don't you think we should spend more time just the two of us?" she said as they left the bar. "I know you like them, but sometimes I feel like we're always caught up in their plans." Jake tried to soothe Emma's concerns by hugging her. "I understand, love. But they are our best friends. Let's have dinner with them tonight, and I promise we'll spend time just the two of us next week." Emma nodded reluctantly. "All right. But I want you to know I miss moments with only you." Days went by, and they continued to go out with Andrew and Laura. The quartet grew closer, and they all joked about being inseparable. Emma seemed to be getting used to it, but occasionally mentioned the need for time alone. Jake, Emma began one evening while holding his hand. "I know we're a group, but I wanted to do something different this weekend. Just the two of us." Jake hesitated. "But Andrew and Laura are expecting us." She took a deep breath. Please, Jake, just one weekend." He smiled and gave in to her request. All right, love. Let's spend time just the two of us." They spent a weekend away from everyone, exploring new restaurants and cafes, and Emma was radiant. Jake promised himself he would do more to keep that smile on her face. But upon returning, he found himself dragged back into the routine of group outings. Emma sighed resignedly. "I love our friends, but I wonder if you miss just being with me." Jake smiled and kissed her forehead. "I always want to be close to you. I promise we'll have more time together." These promises were made with the best intentions, but he found it difficult to balance Emma's desire for exclusivity with the bond he shared with Andrew and Laura. One day, Emma looked Jake directly in the eyes and said seriously, "Jake, I really need you to listen. If we don't have this time together, I'm not sure how much longer we can keep going like this." He swallowed hard, understanding the gravity of the request. "I will really try, Emma. I promise." She smiled, but in the days that followed, her insistence increasingly bothered him. That's when everything began to change. To celebrate 2 years together, Jake surprised Emma with a trip to the beach. He took her to a boutique hotel overlooking the sea, where the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and violet. When Emma opened the suite door and saw rose petals scattered on the bed, she couldn't contain her joy. "Jake, this is beautiful," she exclaimed, giving him a passionate kiss. He held her face in his hands. "I'd do anything to keep you smiling like this." The weekend was perfect. They walked along the beach, laughed about old stories, and talked about the future they imagined together. While Emma rested in Jake's arms, he realized he had found the woman with whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life. Will we always remember this place?" Emma whispered, snuggling up to him. We will. And I'll make sure these moments keep happening even more often," he promised. After returning home, feeling renewed and closer than ever, Jake wanted to keep enjoying time alone with Emma. However, she seemed to want to include Andrew and Laura in their plans. One night, while Jake was preparing dinner for the two of them, Emma appeared in the kitchen. "I invited Andrew and Laura to come to dinner with us tomorrow. I thought it would be fun," she said innocently. Jake raised an eyebrow. But I thought we were going to spend the evening just the two of us." "Oh, Jake, we can have time alone afterward. They're our friends, it'll be good." Jake sighed. "All right, but I want a weekend just for us soon, okay?" Emma smiled, kissing him on the cheek. "Of course, love." The two women became close friends. Emma and Laura often met to shop for gifts or have coffee, and it didn't take long for Jake to realize that his desire for exclusivity was being overshadowed by the growing friendship between them. "You're meeting Laura again today?" Jake asked, seeing Emma head out the door with her bag over her shoulder. We're going for a quick coffee," she replied. "I'll be back soon." Jake tried not to worry about the frequency of group outings but missed more peaceful moments alone. That night, while Emma was getting ready for bed, Jake brought up the issue. "Emma, we need to prioritize our time together more." She looked at him surprised. "Do you really think so?" "Oido. It's important. I miss you." Emma sighed and nodded. "All right, love. I promise we'll make more time for it." However, over time, she always found a way to include Andrew and Laura in their plans, and Jake would end up giving in. He wanted to avoid conflict, but he increasingly felt like he was being pushed out of the relationship he cherished so much. Jake and Emma had planned to spend a quiet weekend together, something that had been postponed for days. They decided to visit Emma's hometown, a peaceful and picturesque place with good restaurants and charming scenery. The night before the trip, while having dinner in the kitchen, Emma began discussing their plans. "So, tomorrow, I thought we could stroll around town, visit that art gallery my sister recommended, and then have lunch at the Port restaurant," Emma said, smiling. Jake hesitated. Well, I was thinking we could spend the morning at the inn and maybe head to the winery later. It'll be a bit more relaxing." Emma's expression changed, and she placed her wine glass on the table with some force. "You always want to do things your way, Jake." My way?" he asked, surprised. "I just thought it would be better not to have such a tight itinerary. We're trying to relax, right?" Emma crossed her arms. "And you think I don't want to relax?" "But no, you always think you know what's best." Jake began to get irritated. "It's not about knowing what's best, Emma. It's about enjoying the weekend without rushing. It's been a while since we've had time for ourselves." Exactly, and I want to do something that interests me too," she retorted, narrowing her eyes. Can't you compromise a little for a change?" "But I'm trying to find something that works for both of us." "You're not even listening." The argument quickly became more heated, with both insisting that the other was being selfish. Emma accused Jake of always trying to control the plans, while he insisted she was being inflexible and didn't consider his opinion. "You know what? I've had enough," Emma said, tears in her eyes. "If you can't understand how important this is to me, maybe it's best if we each do our own thing." So that's it?" Jake asked angrily. "You want to give up on a weekend together because of this?" "No, but I'm not going to stay here arguing with you over something so simple," Emma said. The argument between Jake and Emma had been silly, a disagreement over something insignificant that grew larger than necessary. Emma insisted that Jake was being selfish about the weekend plans, while he felt she was being inflexible. "You always have to do things your way," she snapped, irritated. "And you never try to see things from my side," Jake retorted. They both fell silent, frustrated. Jake left the house to clear his head and take a walk, trying to process the sharp words exchanged between them. After some time, he decided to stop by Andrew's house. He hadn't given notice but figured his friend would be around and could offer a calmer perspective. However, upon arriving, he saw Emma leaving Andrew's house, her eyes red from crying. "Emma!" Jake called out, confused. What are you doing here?" She winced at his voice. "Jake, what are you doing here?" "I should be asking you. Why were you at Andrew's house?" She wiped away her tears and tried to appear calm. "I just needed to vent. You were being so stubborn today. I wanted to talk to someone who would understand." Jake frowned. "And you thought Andrew was the best person for that?" He's your best friend, isn't he?" "I thought he would understand." Emma avoided meeting Jake's eyes, which only made him more uneasy. Andrew appeared in the doorway, sensing the tension between them. "Jake, man, she just needed someone to talk to." "It's nothing." But Jake wasn't convinced. He looked from Emma to Andrew, feeling a pang of doubt. "You two have seemed pretty close lately. Has something changed?" Jake asked, more directly than he intended. "Jake, please," Andrew replied. "Don't create problems where there are none. We're your friends." Emma finally met Jake's gaze. "There's nothing to worry about. I needed a conversation and I thought Andrew could help." You need to trust me. Jake wanted to believe them. Their friendship had always been solid, and he hated the idea of ruining it with unfounded suspicions. However, something about her behavior gave him no peace. Let's go home, Emma, Jake said reluctantly, trying to push aside his troubling thoughts. She nodded, wiped away her tears, and headed to the car. Andrew offered a brief smile before closing the door, but Jake couldn't help but notice the evasive look in his friend's eyes. On the way home, Jake felt like something was changing. The way Emma remained silent on the drive back and avoided eye contact left him even more uneasy. But he tried to push aside his concerns. After all, they were his friends, and he had to trust them, right? A few days after the strange scene at Andrew's house, Emma sent Jake a message. We need to talk. It's urgent. The short words put Jake on alert, fearing the worst. He rushed to her place and, upon entering, found Emma with red eyes and a trembling voice. Hey Emma, what happened? He asked anxiously. She looked at him, tears welling up again. Jake. I'm pregnant. The air seemed to escape his lungs. He stood there, stunned, trying to process the information. What? How did this happen? He knew the question didn't make sense but was in shock. Emma wiped her tears. I know, I'm scared too. But we can do this, right? Jake finally collected himself and hugged her tightly. Yes, of course we can. Everything will be all right. They spent the night discussing what to do next and how to prepare for the baby's arrival. Despite the initial shock, the news began to fill Jake with a new sense of joy. He was already imagining what it would be like to be a father and found himself surrounded by expectations and dreams. As the pregnancy progressed, they decided to discuss who would be the godparents. Jake wanted his sister to be the godmother, but Emma disagreed. Jake, your sister is already an aunt. I'd like Andrew and Laura to be the godparents, she said with a smile Jake couldn't reciprocate. Andrew and Laura? He questioned, recalling the scene at his friend's house weeks earlier. I think we should choose someone from the family. But they're like family, aren't they? Besides, they'll always be around. Jake hesitated but didn't want to argue with Emma during her pregnancy. All right, if it's that important to you. Her smile returned. It's going to be great, Jake. Trust me. Andrew and Laura accepted the invitation enthusiastically, promising to be the best godparents possible for the baby. They were present throughout the pregnancy, helping out where they could. Andrew was especially supportive, helping Jake renovate the baby's room and always stopping by with gifts. Over time, Andrew and Laura became dedicated godparents. Andrew helped Jake set up the baby's room, carefully choosing toys and furniture, always saying he wanted his godchild to have a special space. Jake tried to convince himself that Andrew's presence was just that of a helpful friend. However, the closeness between Emma and Andrew bothered him. Emma seemed to trust him in a way that went beyond the ordinary, but Jake suppressed his suspicions, attributing them to jealousy. The final months of pregnancy were a mix of excitement and anxiety for Jake and Emma. Andrew and Laura were always around, bringing gifts and offering support at each prenatal appointment. In the early hours of a Sunday morning, the first contractions began and Emma woke Jake in a panic. Jake, it's time. We need to go. He jumped out of bed and grabbed the pre-packed bags. On the way to the hospital, he called Andrew and Laura, who offered to help in any way they could. At the hospital, Emma was taken to the delivery room while Jake stayed by her side, holding her hand and trying to calm her. Shortly afterward, Andrew and Laura arrived and found Jake in the hallway, visibly nervous. How is she? Andrew asked. She's holding up well, but the pain is already intense. It's going to be a long process. Andrew put his hand on Jake's shoulder. Everything will go well. We're here with you. Laura nodded. We're praying for Emma and the baby to be okay. When the situation became more critical and Emma was ready to push, Jake returned to the room. He held Emma's hand and whispered words of encouragement. After a long effort, finally, a baby's cry filled the room and they welcomed their son, Luke. Jake and Emma were overwhelmed with emotion. They smiled, tears in their eyes, as little Luke was placed in Emma's arms. The doctor congratulated the couple, and after some time together, the nurses took Luke for routine checkups. Outside, Andrew and Laura waited anxiously. So, how did it go? Andrew asked as soon as he saw Jake leave the room. Luke is here. He's perfect, Jake smiled, his eyes red from crying. Andrew and Laura hugged Jake and, after a few hours, went into the room to see the baby and offer their congratulations. Laura admired Luke in Emma's arms. He's beautiful. I'm so happy for you both. Andrew looked at Emma, and for a moment, their eyes met in an odd way. You were amazing, Emma, he said with a warm smile. Jake tried to push aside the uneasiness rising in his chest. He forced himself to smile, believing he was being unnecessarily jealous. We'll be one big family, right? Andrew nodded, but there was something indistinct in his gaze. Yes, one big family, Andrew replied, casting a quick glance at Emma before turning back to Jake. While Jake struggled to stay calm, the growing closeness between Emma and Andrew continued to make him suspicious, although he tried his best to quiet those doubts. One day, Jake came home early from work, carrying a bag of snacks to surprise Emma. When he opened the door, he heard laughter and found Andrew playing with Luke on the living room floor while Emma watched with a smile. They seemed like a small family, and Jake felt his discomfort grow. Andrew? Jake said, trying to keep a neutral tone. Andrew stood up quickly. Hey Jake. I was passing by and thought I'd check on Luke. Emma smiled nervously as she watched Jake. Andrew brought a little gift for Luke. Couldn't you call before coming by, Andrew? Jake asked, trying to hide his frustration. Andrew scratched his head. Sorry, man. Didn't mean to intrude. No, you didn't intrude, Emma interjected defensively. Jake, he just wanted to see his godson. What's the problem? Jake took a deep breath. I think it's best if you leave now, Andrew. Emma and I need to talk. Andrew hesitated but then left, giving an awkward smile as he said goodbye to Emma and Luke. When the door closed, Jake turned to Emma. Don't you think this is going too far? He asked, irritated. Emma crossed her arms. You're overreacting. He's the godfather of our son. That doesn't mean he can come over whenever he wants and act like he's part of this family, Jake said, feeling the tension rise. I know you trust him, but this closeness is crossing the line. Emma took a step forward, her face twisted with anger. You're being paranoid. Andrew is your best friend and our son's godfather. Why can't you trust him? Jake clenched his fists, struggling to stay calm. I just want him to keep some distance. Emma sighed in frustration. You need to calm down. This is getting ridiculous. The argument intensified, and Luke, frightened, began to cry. Emma picked up the baby, rocking him back and forth. Jake stepped back, realizing he had lost his temper. I don't want him here when I'm not around, he said, his voice weary. Emma shook her head in disbelief. You're being completely irrational, Jake. The friendship between Jake and Andrew was strained, and Jake's relationship with Emma began to crumble. The couple fought more frequently, with trust giving way to resentment and suspicion. The distance between them grew, and Jake wondered if it was already too late to try to save the relationship. The tension between Jake and Andrew reached a critical point. Jake spent sleepless nights replaying the past few weeks and his recurring arguments with Emma. He needed answers and finally decided to confront Andrew directly. In the early afternoon, Jake called his friend. Andrew, we need to talk. I'll come over to your place. Andrew hesitated. Are you sure you want to do this now? I am. Meet me there. When Jake arrived, Andrew was sitting in the living room, his shoulders tense. As soon as Jake walked in, Andrew looked at him with a grim expression. So, what do you want to talk about? Andrew asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone. I want you to be honest with me, Jake said, a knot forming in his stomach. Are you hiding something? Andrew looked away, his hands trembling. Jake, I don't know how to say this. Jake stepped closer, impatient. Just say it. Andrew began to cry. Jake, I'm so sorry. I betrayed you. Emma and I have been having an affair for months. The revelation hit Jake like a punch. "A what? How could you do this?" Andrew wiped away his tears, sobbing. "I wanted to tell you earlier, but I couldn't. I'm Luke's father." Jake was left speechless, trying to process what he had just heard. He trembled with rage. "You destroyed everything, Andrew," he shouted, punching his friend in the face. Andrew fell to the ground, clutching his bruised face. "I know I messed up. I know I can never make this right. You'll regret this for the rest of your life." Jake yelled before storming out and slamming the door. When Jake returned from Andrew's house, he didn't feel like himself anymore. His mind was still reeling from the confession he had just heard, but he needed to confront Emma with the truth. He opened the front door and found Emma holding Luke in the living room. She immediately sensed something was wrong. Jake, what happened?" Jake looked at her, feeling a tightness in his chest. Andrew told me." Emma's face went pale, but she kept her composure. What exactly did he say?" That he's Luke's father. That you had an affair behind my back," Jake said, his eyes glistening with tears. So it's true?" Emma remained silent for a moment, then looked at Jake coldly. Yes, it's true. Andrew is Luke's father." Jake took a deep breath, struggling to stay calm. Why did you do this to me, Emma?" Emma took a deep breath. "I fell in love with Andrew. That's what happened. I didn't plan on betraying you, but it happened." Her words cut through Jake like a knife. He swallowed hard, feeling like he'd been punched in the chest. "You fell in love with him? And you had the nerve to insist that he be our child's godfather?" Emma held Luke more tightly. "I wanted him to be involved in his child's life. Luke deserves to know who his father is." His father?" Jake asked incredulously. "You lied to me the entire time, and now you're trying to justify this as something Luke deserves?" Emma looked him in the eye, defiant. "I just wanted to be honest." "Honest?" Jake let out a bitter laugh. "You were dishonest with me from the start." Emma didn't back down. "It wasn't intentional. I didn't plan for this to happen, but I can't take it back." Her coldness devastated Jake. "Didn't you think about me? About how I'd feel?" "I only want what's best for him," Emma replied, holding Luke even tighter. "I did what I thought was right." Jake was trembling, rage boiling inside him. "You destroyed our family. You never thought about Luke or what this would mean for him." He lost his temper and punched the wall, the physical pain mingling with the emotional. "You ruined everything," he shouted, pulling the ring off his finger and placing it on the table. We're finished," he said, his voice trembling. "You destroyed it all." He turned his back and left the house without looking back. Emma remained motionless, holding Luke in her arms without a tear in her eyes. She knew there were no excuses for what she had done, but now she had to face the consequences. The weight of what she had destroyed finally caught up with her as she sat on the couch, staring at the closed door through which Jake had just left. Jake isolated himself in the days following Andrew and Emma's confession. He avoided his friends and locked himself in his apartment, consumed by chaotic thoughts. The guilt weighed on him like an unbearable burden. How could I have been so blind? I was the one who brought them together, he repeated to himself, night after night, staring at the ceiling of his room. Despite the betrayal, he still considered Luke his son. Every time he thought about seeing him, he felt an emptiness growing inside. He couldn't forgive Emma, but he didn't want to abandon Luke. On a cold morning, Jake picked up the phone and called Emma. She answered on the third ring. Jake, she began, her voice hesitant. I want to see Luke, he said. Just for a few hours. There was a brief pause before she replied. You can come this afternoon. He misses you. Jake arrived at Emma's house not knowing what to expect. She opened the door with Luke in her arms, offering a cautious smile. Hey Luke, look who's here to see you, she said softly. Jake picked Luke up and felt a tightness in his heart. Hey champ, he whispered. Daddy's here. While Jake played with Luke, Emma watched from a distance. The silence between her and Jake was uncomfortable, but he knew there was nothing more to say between them. After a few hours, Jake handed Luke back to Emma. She stood still, holding her son with a neutral expression. "Thanks for coming," she said, avoiding Jake's gaze. "I'll want to see him again," Jake replied, trying not to let the pain show. In the following months, Jake tried to move on, but the betrayal consumed him. He spent nights thinking about what he could have done differently. Had he neglected Emma? Or had she always had the disposition to betray? Andrew and Laura stayed together, but Jake could never look at the couple without feeling a deep, simmering anger grow inside him. When he tried to forgive, a voice told him that he could never trust Emma in the same way again. He still loved her but couldn't ignore the disdain he felt when remembering the betrayal. One night, while flipping through an album of old photos, he muttered to himself, "One day, I'll find someone who truly values me. Someone who respects me." He knew it would take time to rebuild trust and heal the loneliness he felt, but there was a glimmer of hope that he would eventually find a love worth having.